Hey guys, welcome to Battles Gaming, and to the first of what will be many Far Cry 6 related videos coming to you from this channel. Today I'm going to be sharing with you guys the top 10 features I'd like to see in the next Far Cry editor, the Far Cry 6 editor. And whilst it's not yet been confirmed if we'll have the editor in the next Far Cry game, I think it would be remiss for Ubisoft not to include it, considering the map making community makes half of what Far Cry is and has become. I also thought now would be an appropriate time to cover this subject, and not the campaign, since every man, cat and dog is currently on the Far Cry 6 campaign hype train, myself included, but there's no one really talking about the editor right now, so I thought I would take this opportunity to do so now. Now, with the game releasing in just 7 months' time, I'm not sure how much time Ubisoft will have to implement the following features. Hopefully they've already implemented most of them based on the feedback they would have already received from the Far Cry 5 community, but we'll just have to wait and see. Now, this list has some very small features and some bigger ones, but nonetheless I think they're all just as important as each other, with each feature representing what I think the whole Far Cry map making community wants to see from the next game. I've sourced these features from my own personal experiences building and playing maps on the Far Cry 5 arcade, whilst also extracting some ideas for features from comments I've seen on YouTube, Ubisoft forums, and just general conversations with people I've played Far Cry with on the Xbox. Therefore, I think all these features really encompass what the community wants as a whole. Now lastly, before I get into these 10, if you're new around here and as passionate about the map editor as I am, then please consider subscribing and joining this small community that we've got going on. Over the past 2 years, I have been posting 2 series of videos to this channel, the first being my own custom map series, where I feature the maps that I have created on the Far Cry 5 arcade, and secondly my community creation series, where I feature other people's maps from the Far Cry 5 arcade. Now these series will continue until the release of Far Cry 6, whereupon I'll transform both series to start featuring Far Cry 6 maps. But without any further ado, jump onto the hype train for the Far Cry 6 map editor, and let's get into the first community requested feature, and that is a prefab asset tool. Now before I discuss, I just wanted to disclaim that this list is in no particular order, as I would love to see every feature I discuss today in the next Far Cry game, so if you're thinking these features are ranked from my least preferable to most preferable, please note that this is not the case. Now a prefab asset tool would be great for the next Far Cry editor, as it would allow us to save a group of assets that we've put together as its own unique asset. For example, right now on the screen you guys can see me touring a Vietnam bunker, which I have extensively detailed on the interior and exterior. Now whilst I can copy and paste this group of assets together within the same map that I built it on, there's no way for me to use this custom creation in another map. I would have to detail the bunker from scratch, losing valuable time. Furthermore, this feature could be expanded so that we could share and download custom assets from other people within the community. Moving on to number 2 on the list, and that is more terrain texture slots. The fact that we only have 4 means that the ability to create realistic looking natural environments that blend multiple biomes together can often be a challenge. Say you wanted to create a journey map where players spawn on a beach and end up in snow-capped mountains. You would need to set aside one paint texture for the sandy beaches, one paint texture for the mountain cliffs, one paint texture for the snow, and then only have one more paint texture for every other surface in the map. To put this into perspective, here is sped up footage of a helicopter flight I took in Ghost Recon Wildlands the other day. And whilst I'm certainly not expecting a Far Cry map editor to have this much space to work with, it's awesome to see how Ubisoft has blended all these environments together in the one map through the clever use of gradually blended paint textures. There's snowy, jungle, desert, tundra, salt lake, rocky, and more types of textures, and I think having the ability to have up to 8 paint textures or more would be a great addition to the Far Cry 6 map editor. Next up, we have the ability to create wider roads. Now this is one of the multiplayer maps that I have created, Biomes, And in this urban environment, you can actually see that I use the white decal lines and asphalt paint texture to create this road, because using the editor's inbuilt road tool is pretty poor. Here you guys can see me selecting asphalt highway and using the widest road tool setting of 8, but despite this, the road is still extremely narrow, only being able to fit one car in each lane. Having the ability to have a wider road tool would allow us to create more believable urban environments and would ensure that we wouldn't have to sacrifice a paint texture slot using the asphalt paint texture to give the illusion that our roads were wider. We would simply have the ability to have a wider road tool which would counter these detriments. Number 4 is snapping tools. Now it's worth noting that whilst this feature is already on PC, it's not present on the console versions of the game. So working with assets like the generic shapes is a much tougher task on the consoles. Working with generic shapes on the consoles means that we have to try and line up generic shapes by squinting our eyes and carefully moving the shapes together with the most steadily available hands. And whilst rotational 90-degree snapping is a feature, the ability to connect assets together like magnets would be an absolute saving grace. This would allow creators on the console, such as myself, to make more insane custom structures at a much more effective pace. Now the next 3 features are more so for the multiplayer aspect of the editor, and the first one I'm going to be talking about is the budget. The budget of multiplayer maps is a lot less than solo co-op maps. This really puts a limit on the number of assets, vehicles, weapons, wildlife, and other things we can put on the map. Right now I'm editing inside a multiplayer map, and you can see that some of the houses are already too much for one budget grid square to handle. Having a budget grid square that is red means your map is not able to be tested, played, or published, and so I reckon a big chunk of time is wasted in every multiplayer map having to unnecessarily space everything out. For example, as you can see here, I'm trying to place all these houses as close to each other as I can, but because each of them have so much physics attached to them in terms of the objects within the house, it means that I have to space out these houses across 4 grid squares, really limiting what I can do. Increasing the budget, especially for multiplayer maps, I think is one of the most important features on this list, and hopefully Ubisoft finds a way to implement this before the release of Far Cry 6, as it looks like with Far Cry 6 being set in a much more denser and urban environment, at least that's what I picked up from the trailer. If we can't build multiplayer maps that are heavily urban focused in Far Cry 6, it will be a complete catastrophe to the map making community. The second of 3 map editor features, focusing more on the multiplayer, is more game modes. Now we've already got a comprehensive variety of solo co-op game modes in Assault, Outpost, Journey, and Bounty Hunt, but one of the biggest letdowns in Far Cry 5 multiplayer was the absence of any additional game modes besides Team Deathmatch and Deathmatch. Having the addition of objective-based game modes like Capture the Flag, Domination, and even a Battle Royale would increase the variety of maps that could be made and played, keeping player retention a lot higher post-release. And now to finish with the third of 3 map editor features focusing more on the multiplayer, we have respawnable vehicles. In Far Cry 5 multiplayer, vehicles are pretty much useless, as once they've been destroyed, they're gone forever. And considering the number of maps with explosives in the loadouts, not to mention the sabotage trapping perk that you could acquire from the campaign, most vehicles would be wiped off the map shortly after the start of each game. This meant that for many bigger maps, the means to travel around the map was often limited to just running and swimming after a few minutes. Now the combination of the last 2 features mentioned, more game modes and respawnable vehicles, I believe would absolutely transform the next Far Cry game into an unbelievable experience for the players. Moving on to the tail end of our list, we have map descriptions. Whilst there's a saying that a picture tells 1,000 words, sometimes a preview picture of someone's map is just not enough. Map descriptions could be used to tell a story, give important instructions to players, or just a simple comment such as "have fun playing." Currently, many creators will use the loadouts to convey a message to other players, but this is an extremely limited method. On the other end of the spectrum, some creators like to use generic lettering within their maps, but as I'm sure anyone who has used generic lettering is aware of, this is an extremely time-consuming process that could be easily avoided via the addition of map descriptions. Coming in at number 9, and this would be a truly revolutionary feature, and that is co-op map editing. Co-op map editing would allow two people to work on a map together at the same time. Think Google Docs, but in the Far Cry map editor. This would allow the completion time of map creations to be sliced in half, whilst also giving co-op map editors the ability to make up for each other's shortfalls. For example, say person A is better at terrain, but not so familiar with scripting. They could partner up with person B, who might be terrible at terrain, but very experienced with scripting. By partnering up person A and person B together, each person's weaknesses can be made up for by the other person. And I think the best thing about this is that it would keep more people engaged with the editor post-release, not to mention the fun of testing your maps with your friend at the end of a very long editing session. And finally, to end this Far Cry 6 map editor wishlist, we have NPC variety. Imagine as map editors having the ability to change an NPC's appearance, weapons, gender, dialogue, and behavior. Now, whilst I firmly believe that the Far Cry 6 editor should retain all NPCs from Far Cry 5, whilst also adding Far Cry 6 NPCs, I think the ability to have a basic NPC model that we as editors can accessorize would be an awesome addition to the next map editor. This would allow us to tailor each solo co-op map experience to perfection in terms of what specific type of enemies and challenges are presented to players that play our maps. But otherwise, that wraps up my wishlist for the Far Cry 6 map editor. This is just 10 features I'd like to see make it into the next Far Cry map editor, and if you guys enjoyed this list, please remember to like the video, and if you're new around here, subscribe and hit the bell icon for future channel notifications. Now that I've given you the top 10 features that I think most, if not all, the map making community would like to see in the next Far Cry editor, I want to hear your thoughts. Do you agree or disagree with any of the features that I've discussed today, or more so, do you have any other ideas for the next Far Cry editor? Comment below and I look forward to hearing your suggestions. But as always, I'm Braddles Gaming, I'm signing out now, and remember to have yourselves a great day.